such discussions began. The module was first developed by my colleague Dr. Jim McPherson and reflected growing proactive elements that ran through the work of many of the Centre for History's team members, taking history beyond academia, collaboration with heritage, museum and archive professionals and local community groups in telling, shaping and recovering of the past with, for and by those local communities. A proactive level of engagement with the community, and particularly the importance of offering students from those communities a way to explore the history of the Highlands and Islands region, bringing this together with the history of the world beyond such, has been central to the ethos of the Centre for History ever since its foundation in 2005, as explored most eloquently in the inaugural lecture of Professor James Hunter, published in 2007. However, this module drew together this desire to teach students about history and the skills required to do this, with the active research and collaborative work that members of the team were doing beyond the classroom with non-academic community groups in new and at the time incredibly innovative ways. So, the key aims of the module, it has two. To provide an opportunity for students to design an independent research project in preparation for the history dissertation that students undertake in fourth year with the support of an assigned supervisor, i.e. they work out an appropriate, hopefully, research question, consider the historiography and how they will engage with it, and collate and reflect upon primary materials that they will explore and analyse in response to their question. Secondly, it offers an introduction to the means of taking that academic research to a public audience, and they get the opportunity to learn about the ways in which this can be done, particularly through the provision of several guest speakers from various heritage bodies and public history professionals who kindly contribute their knowledge and experience to introduce students to the multitude of formats in which historical research can be presented for or even developed with the public. The summative assignments on this module are a research outline, which is quite traditional with an annotated bibliography of primary and secondary sources, and then a second assessment. The second summative assessment, is a public history project proposal associated with their chosen topic, which includes a comprehensive outline of the project's public history output and methods of achieving such, and a critical reflection on public history as a concept and the specific methods, practices and exemplars that have informed the students' choices. As they don't write a traditional essay on the topic, but have undertaken significant research into primary and secondary materials, it's also possible for the student to take the project theme forward for the dissertation should they wish to, although they don't have to do that if they don't want to. So I took over the module leadership of public history in 2018-19, and other than this last academic year when I carried on as interim head of the department longer than expected and Jim took over from me at the last minute, I have been module leader for the best part of 7 years. This role has been undertaken alongside my own development as a researcher, which also means it's been entirely intertwined with my activities as co-investigator on the Perth Charterhouse project, which I'll introduce more fully in a moment, but it focuses on the 15th century Carthusian foundation near Perth that was destroyed in the Scottish Reformation circa 1560. This project and my role in it first emerged in late 2016, early 2017, around the same time that I joined the Centre for History, and this paper will explore the cyclical interplay between this project and my teaching activities to explore a pedagogical concept that we are often asked to demonstrate, i.e. research-teaching linkages. Rayner, Smith and Fotheringham reflect on how their research into staff perceptions of research teaching linkages informed their choices in creating UHI's learning and teaching enhancement strategy, with a clear statement that we should be, open quote, engaging students as researchers, close quote, and particularly at higher levels of study, doing so in ways that, open quote, have value for groups, communities and contexts beyond the university, close quote. Leading and teaching on the public history module allows me and the Centre for History team members involved to support students in exploring practical ways of taking history beyond the classroom, informed by our work and connections through external collaborations. Equally, it allows us also to train them as engaged researchers on independent projects, building on the skills that they require throughout the research led, i.e. informed by and including strong focus on research findings in the areas of staff specialism, and research orientated, underpinned, that is, the modules underpinned by generating understanding of the processes of research that they've undertaken in the wider history programme to that point. Yet I also firmly believe that my role in this module reveals a more symbiotic relationship between research and teaching that not only benefits the students, but also the research active staff who are teaching them. This aspect is less common in the scholarship on research teaching linkages and tends to have a fairly gloomy outlook when it is discussed. I would argue that these teaching activities have been a key means of facilitating important opportunities to gain better tools and form stronger theoretical underpinning to support and encourage my own growth and development in such activities, particularly in terms of working towards co-production with communities. Through reflections on this cyclical relationship between teaching and research, this paper offers insights into how public history as a concept and practice has developed and reformed within my research, particularly in relation to the Perth Charterhouse project, and how this has fed back into my teaching and leadership of the module, and work more broadly as a member of the Centre for History team and a late medieval and early modern historian of the Northern European world. For me, this keynote is an unusually self-reflective paper in considering how a research and collaborative project has developed and the theories, pedagogy and methodologies that have influenced and shaped it. As I'll reflect upon it later towards the end of this paper, there is a need, I feel, for more pre-modern scholars engaging with public history to speak and write about their experiences and practices in this subfield of historical activities, as it is an area of scholarship that modern historians dominate at the present time. From a relatively early stage in my academic career, I've always actively sought out ways to take the historical research that I do beyond the confines of academia. But as a late medieval and early modern historian, the opportunities have often sat in the more traditional areas of dissemination of knowledge, through things like radio and television contributions, public talks and events, and collaborations with or research for heritage organisations. So, for example, in 2016, I was commissioned to write a report on the gaps in knowledge about the surviving and lost royal honours or crown jewels of the Scottish monarchs by Historic Environment Scotland, and provide talks on that report to Edinburgh Castle's guiding staff so that these key findings could be disseminated by those staff who interacted with the visiting public at the castle. I'm also one of the talking heads on an audio-visual guide at Holyrood Abbey, talking about Scottish weddings of kings. And more recently, I was one of the advisory committee members, along with Institute of Northern Studies colleague, Associate Professor Alex Sandmark, on the Stone of Destiny reinterpretation for its rehousing in the new Perth Museum. These sorts of collaborations are clearly a means of taking research beyond the academy and potentially, particularly in key tourist attractions like Edinburgh Castle or Perth Museum, incredibly impactful in terms of the breadth of the audience that they might reach. They are, however, quite top-down dissemination forms of public history, and while there's absolutely nothing wrong with this, I was increasingly keen to find ways to go beyond it. And the Perth Charterhouse project became a vehicle through which such opportunities arose. The Perth Charterhouse project is so named due to its focus on Scotland's only Carthusian priory or charterhouse in or near the borough of Perth in Scotland. This 15th century monastic foundation was one of many material victims of the Reformation and has no above ground physical remains in the modern Perth landscape. The project sought and still seeks to re-establish understanding of Perth's central role in later medieval and early modern Scotland for and with a wider local public audience, with an underpinning desire to explore the potential value of reconnection to place through shared exploration and interpretation of the city's pre-modern heritage. The project's always been a collaborative endeavour between myself and Professor Richard Oram at the University of Stirling, with Culture, Perth and Kinross, which I'll refer to hereafter as CPK, just to be a bit speedier about about the using that acronym. So CPK are particularly important partners, as Perth's material and archival collections for this period are managed, curated and cared for by this organisation through their archives, libraries and museums. And they sit at the heart of, and these documents and objects sit at the heart of this project, along with records housed at the National Records of Scotland belonging to the King James VI Hospital in Perth, which sits on part of the Carthusian site. And we've worked with them in a more intermittent fashion, but have particularly had more significant successes in working with them in recent years. Additionally, we have also interacted and worked with various other local stakeholders, including the Perth Society of Natural Sciences, PSNS, Older Archaeology, Friends of Perth and Kinross Archives, the Perth Guildry, the Perth Glubbers Incorporation, Plus Perth and others. Initially, we were also working with Glasgow School of Art's School of Simulation and Visualisation, which is shortened to SimVis, and is much easier to say than trying to say that name again. And more recently, we've been working with Gavin Lindsay, a self-employed archaeologist trading as All Ages Limited and an alumni of UHI, who specialises in community archaeology and educational programmes, as well as the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, and particularly, although not exclusively, since 2024, the community of residents and businesses that now inhabit the site on which the Carthusian Priory would have sat. We also recently received funding from the Strathmartin Trust, which went towards our first investigative ground penetrating radar scanning. So most of Perth's medieval buildings have been lost to the ravages of time, with a few notable exceptions, such as the parish church of St John's in the centre of the city. However, the choice of the Charterhouse in Perth emerged for several reasons outlined on the slide, in terms of its founding, its completion after the murder of its founder, and its echoing presence through the documentary archives despite its destruction. The Charterhouse was a uniquely fascinating physical emblem of the significance and prominence of Perth in the later 14th and 15th century, and offered us lots of exciting potential. By the early 20th century, however, all of Perth's religious sites, the Charterhouse included, were deemed to have been lost to the collective memory of Perth. The Town Council invested in monumental place markers to rekindle historical associations with these physical spaces, which speaks to David Glassberg's proposition that, open quote, historical consciousness and place consciousness are inextricably intertwined, close quote. Raising a monument to the Charterhouse in 1914 was dual-purposed, according to its unveiling speech, to generate local interest about the past and to attract local visitors, to attract more visitors to the town. Both aims are still highly relevant in modernity, particularly in a post-pandemic period when the focus on making locations and venues attractive to visitors, both local and incoming, to revitalise trade and businesses is central to local, regional and national bodies. However, generating meaningful interactions with the past, if done sensitively and collaboratively, can offer means of engaging people in and over the longer term and in hopefully more transformative ways. This last point has always been central to our project, but I would suggest that in hindsight, this was an aspiration that we perhaps did not fully understand how to achieve at the outset. Moreover, it has definitely been in recent years of the project, particularly since COVID lockdowns, that we, or at least I, because I'm speaking for myself here, not everybody else involved in the project, have started to really understand and thus be able to incorporate the methods and approaches that might make such goals possible as a reality rather than just as an aspiration. The reasons for this, I would argue, are partly to do with my role in leading and teaching on public history as a module at UHI, and the opportunities that doing so has afforded me. This is not to suggest that our earlier activities were not proactively seeking collaborative engagement because they were public-facing from the start. Rather that through the active research around the wide-ranging public history scholarship to facilitate developments and teaching on the module, the engagements with a variety of guest speakers and their insights, and the dialogues with the different cohorts of students about what public history meant and means, I've developed a firmer and clearer sense of the direction in terms of what I want to achieve and also how we might go about it in the project. Equally, my activities, research and thinking about the project have also fed back into the module in various ways, from the speakers that we have been able to invite and the readings and resources that we've provided, through to the types of activities that we undertake on discussion boards or in the video conference classes. Here it's worth pausing and thinking briefly about some definitions of public history to better frame the remainder of this paper, which will outline these concurrent developments between the Charterhouse project and within the developments of the module. So for these, I have unashamedly gone straight to the readings and class notes that I prepare for the second week of the public history module, where we first ask the students to explore readings and resources that seek to define what it is we mean by this term. And the slide includes both quotes from historians and anonymised quotes from students posted on the discussion board, permission for which was sought from the students beforehand. One of the key questions that we have always discussed at this early stage is the debates and differences between the more traditional dissemination of knowledge that I mentioned as my entry point with my own activities, and collaborative or co-produced or co-designed work more directly with the public. And these are essential to the framing of the remainder of this discussion. While highly valuable and incredibly important, the dissemination of historical knowledge to those beyond academia puts the historian in a position of being the active agent who holds the knowledge, and the public are by and large the passive receivers of that knowledge. And this type of public history is probably one of the most common ones, and this is often also what many students initially envisage when we first start talking about what public history means at the beginning of the module. However, the forms of public history that include collaboration, co-production and co-design with the public puts the non-academic participants at the centre of the production of history through engaging them at various stages of the process of recovering and relaying the past in the present. It's these sorts of activities that, open quote, empowers the individual in their sense of ownership and as contributors to what history is and how it is made, close quote, and facilitate Romana Tal's ideal of the democratization of knowledge. One of the students in the 23-24 cohort summarized the impact of this for those involved particularly eloquently, stating that if delivered successfully, it can give people a voice and make the public feel as though they are part of history rather than occupying an external space as observers. The latter category of collaborative and co-produced public history has significant variance within it, from the fairly modest involvement of public in workshops and volunteer activities to provide skills that are largely designed by academics and or collaborating organisations, right through to the more radical ideas of heritage from below, such as those promoted by the Centre's own Dr. Ian Robertson. For him and many others, such projects should ideally be grassroots and bottom-up and should be, open quote, from below and within, conceived for, from and by local communities, close quote. It's through working on this module, reading and rereading articles, furnishing the resource lists with newer scholarship and resources, and discussing ideas, methods and exemplars with the various cohorts of students in recent years about what constitutes public history, in tandem with working on the Perth Charterhouse project, that have encouraged an ongoing process for me in reevaluating what it is we've been doing in the project and how we might go about moving forwards. So the remainder of the keynote will summarise some of these key points about these interwoven developments. So you don't need to read everything on the list. It's just to give you an idea of some of the activities that we've been undertaking. So when I took over the module leadership of the public history module in 2018-19, we were at the early stages of the project, which began in earnest with a meeting between collaborating stakeholders in late 2016. We had a lot of public engagement activities in the first couple of years. As listed on the slide, these included a public launch event through a number of public launch events through which we were approached by a local volunteer who was social media savvy and supported us in our early forays in Twitter. She was wonderful, and I can't thank her enough. Giving talks to local societies, collaborative workshops with CPK's archive team, and supporting them with an application to secure a Scottish Graduate School of Arts and Humanities internship to work on the incorporated guild collections, which includes a significant amount of the Charterhouse materials. However, the design and organisational steer originated with the academics and those local organisations, with significant efforts funnelled into a large collaborative ESRC bid between the University of Stirling, including the History and Film and Media departments, UHI, the Centre for History and the Educational Development Unit, and SIMVIS at the Glasgow School of Art, which was titled Viewing the Past from a Digital Future, Enhancing Social Value of Heritage Education Within and Through Public Spaces. Our aims were underpinned by the desire to build community resilience and connections to place through the medieval past, but the grant application was driven in large part by SIMVIS's interest in digital heritage around lost buildings and a collective interest in asking questions about the value of the digital mediums for delivering heritage offerings. So while public engagement activities were ongoing and they were key in a lot of things that we were doing, it was very much a top-down type of project that was being driven by the collaborating stakeholder universities and organisations. The collaborations had a positive impact on the public history module, however, in the early years of my module leadership through the variety of guest speaker sessions. When Dr. Macpherson designed the module initially, the Centre for History's collaborations with High Life Highland, an equivalent body to CPK in the Highland region that's responsible for museums, archives, libraries, as well as other things, shaped the provision of these sessions. From 2018 onwards, we introduced more varied speakers and different types of sessions. And ultimately, this came from the collaborative relationships occurring through the Charterhouse project initially. So this has included a digital heritage gaming and virtual reality week with guest speakers from SIMVIS who brought an exciting range of their digital heritage projects into the module, including the British Empire Exhibition 1938 project, of which there's some nice images on the slide. I also designed a Creative Angles on Public History Week with novelist Helen Grant, who I'd been working with since an early event on the Charterhouse project around a potential novel idea inspired by the narrative of the murder of James I. These weeks, although the speakers have changed over time, have remained features of the module, with the Digital Heritage Gaming and Virtual Reality Week running every year since and always being a firm favourite with the students. We also expanded from this to draw on the wider connections of the Centre for History team to incorporate a more representative range of the Centre's collaborative work with such organisations. Consequently, guest speakers sessions have also included organisations such as the National Trust for Scotland, the National Museums of Scotland, colleagues who worked on the IOLAIR 1919 digital app with Dr. Ian Robertson, the engagement and storytelling team from the Inverness Castle project, and the Expo North programme supporting digital capacity in smaller Highland museums and heritage bodies. With each new speaker, we are also able to expand and enhance the available resources for students and indeed staff on the module, and each speaker brings their own experiences to the dialogue with the video conference classes. But for me, they also bring a wealth of understanding, experience, and new ideas that can be incorporated into my own practice, as well as to help support the students. While the module has flourished, with most, if not all, students increasingly and positively recognising the value of its twofold aims, the Perth Charterhouse project had many challenges. The biggest of these occurred in 2019 and then 2020. Firstly, although we were successfully shortlisted for that ESRC competition that I mentioned in late 2018, we were ultimately not successful in securing such. After 18 months of work, this was a big hit on morale, after which the digital aspect of the project and SimViz retreated for various reasons. However, this allowed a renewed focus on other aspects of the project, particularly those that sought to directly engage and enable the public. Even after 1 year leading the module, I'd already gained an increased awareness of what was important, and this was the desire to proactively move beyond the way that the past was consumed, which in many ways had ended up being the central focus of the ESRC bid as far as the historical side of things were concerned. Our focus returned to work with CPK and their collections and cataloguing and supporting their volunteer training programme for the Perth City Hall Champions, working to promote the advancing plans of CPK and Perth and Kinross Council to turn Perth City Hall into a new museum. We also began planning a series of Charterhouse events for 2020 to encourage alumnus support, particularly with the University of Stirling's Alumni Office, and ticketed events to generate small amounts of money for supporting initial ground penetrating radar and community archaeology and archive projects. The first of these was an evening with James I in St John's Kirk in February 2020. To celebrate 15th century Scottish culture, including readings from James I's poem Kinga's Quair and 15th century music played by Gaita. And we also had modern creative responses to the James I story and the Charterhouse project, with novel readings from Helen Grant and poetry readings from Jim McIntosh, who's a local Perth poet. It was a huge success, and through it we advertised the next event, a public day conference in May, for which we had speakers confirmed, and were working with the archive on a collaborative exhibition. However, less than 3 weeks after this event, the country was in its first COVID-19 lockdown. For a public-facing project increasingly centred on public engagement, this was quite a big blow. Despite initial proactive efforts, including a very prolific blog writing campaign on the part of largely Professor Oram rather than myself, to keep the project profile active and vibrant, from the late summer or autumn of 2020, the project was essentially hibernating until late 2021, as all its partners faced too many challenges to maintain activities, and coaxing it out of hibernation has been a slow process. Yet the public history module continued, and we managed to switch to online provision with the guest speakers who'd previously been coming in person to their closest college campus for the sessions, coming in online, and still being able to run the module as we had done, largely as we had done before. We may have all been in firefighting mode, but leading and teaching on the module at least allowed for a continued and active engagement with the concepts and ideas that were underpinning the work that we were going to do. This meant that the post-COVID revitalisation of the project after this hiatus saw increased reshaping around putting more of the direction-giving powers in the hands of the public that we were working with. Our first significant event followed renewed conversations with CPK in late 2021. The organisation was still struggling in many ways and could not offer the same level of involvement as prior to COVID, but they still hosted at a cost the postponed conference and collaborated in kind with me on the accompanying exhibition. These were essentially dissemination activities. However, rather than just collaboratively put together the exhibition with the archive, I looked for ways to build public engagement and involvement beyond it. So the From Foundations to Echoes in the Records exhibition was looking at the Charterhouse and its place in Perth through the records that the archive held from the 15th to the 20th century, right up until the point that that memorial was raised in 1914, back to its the oldest document that they hold there, which is from the mid-15th century. Utilising anonymous feedback forms, we asked the in-person participants which of the documents or types of documents that they would want to learn more about through workshops or subsequent events. The collated data from approximately 18 feedback forms indicated the preferences. We utilised a Twitter poll and various email mailing lists that the archive and ourselves had to further distribute that. And it was the responses to these requests for information that provided basically the subject matter around which we organised the next set of archival workshops that ran through 2023. These were designed around breaking down barriers for potential volunteers in working with pre-modern manuscripts, because, much to my utter joy, the public picked the medieval and early modern documents, which was not entirely what I was expecting, to be honest, when I had maps and some lovely 20th century material as well. These workshops were really successful, and I'm still a little bit frustrated that other issues entirely out of our control, including various redundancy threats at both organisations, meant that we were unable to facilitate on building on that momentum that we'd built up with those workshops. However, it did fire up a desire for more proactive ways of not just enabling the public, but also co-producing and co-designing with the public. And this underpinned the applications that we made with CPK to the Scottish Graduate School of Arts and Humanities Collaborative Doctoral Award. The projects that we were applying to get a PhD student for sought to address questions about personal devotion and religious behaviour in the long 16th century, but also how such research within these Perth materials could support a richer and more fulsome understanding of the collection to assist CPK in better promoting and encouraging broader use of their pre-modern materials. Central to the public engagement element of this doctoral project was to be a proposal to facilitate activities with multi-faith and those of no declared faith communities, with the aim of co-designing an exhibition and supporting increased understanding of how these less archivally engaged communities might work to put themselves into Perth archives in the future. While these applications were not successful, they marked a distinctive shift in terms of what was most important to the project, i.e. the type of public history that doesn't just enable engagement, but, open quote, empowers the individual in the sense of ownership and as contributors to what history is and how it is made. We're still hoping to take forward parts of that doctoral project in smaller ways, particularly that idea of working with the archive and multi-faith groups, but these things are all going to take place at much slower pace and probably a much smaller scale than we'd envisaged them happening if we'd have had a funded PhD or any other kind of funding for that matter. This is something that now, but this sense of supporting people to find ownership and contribute to what history is and how it's made is something that now underpins the activities of the project in a way it didn't before. In particular, our work with the community living on the Charterhouse site in 2024-25, when we finally secured funding for AOC Archaeology to undertake GPR scanning of the part of the area in 2024, and for Gavin Lindsay, who I mentioned previously, to support us in the role of Community Liaison Officer, albeit temporarily. Through this collaboration with Gavin, I have also been introduced to various scholarship and ideas around community-based participatory research in archaeology that others in this call will definitely know far more about than I do. This has again opened doors for making connections between this and public history practices and making me think and enrich the way that I can then teach the students. The next stage of the mini project that we had involved getting the support of all the relative homeowners, property managers, businesses, and charity owners, and the local authority road network and parking teams that had in some way control over the various elements of this site. The bits that we were looking to scan in the first instance on the slide here, they're in the area at the top marked A, and they're part of the area in B. We didn't get enough money to do the whole site all at once, so we've just done the key areas which would potentially have included the central mass of the precinct and potentially where its gatehouse was. So there was incredible enthusiasm and cooperation from the community, with only one non-resident property owner withholding their permission for the survey, and that's the cross-marked B on the map. And the area with a marked with a cross in A at the top couldn't be scanned because it's a garage with reinforced concrete floor, and the GPR scanning equipment couldn't deal with that. The GPR survey covered a relatively small physical area of 1,000 square metres, but this was also dispersed across a densely built up urban area of around 100 metres wide by 250 metres long. So the space consisted of challenging patchwork of 27 individual survey areas varying in shape, size and ground surface. In reflecting on this process, the archaeologists surmised that a GPR survey of this patchwork nature had never been attempted before in Perth, likely not in Scotland, and possibly not even in the UK. This makes the survey interesting beyond its discoveries in relation to the Charterhouse, but the data presented a formidable challenge, both in terms of assembling it into meaningful visual composites, and then also interpreting what that data means and sharing that with wider audiences. What we found isn't the point of this paper, although I have recently presented on that at the Archaeology Research in Progress conference in Edinburgh, and there's a YouTube link there that I can put in the chat afterwards if anybody's interested in hearing more about that. I can also answer questions on that at the end, should people wish to hear them. Rather, what I want to briefly reflect on finally is how we engaged with the residents, wider public and stakeholders during the scanning and in sharing the results and making plans moving forwards, and how this has been influenced by and has influenced the public history module. So while scanning took place, Gavin and I were present on the ground at various intervals, and we arranged a visitor and community day midway through the week and had support from the Society of Antiquaries, who I must thank for all of these wonderful photographs. However, for us, it was the post-survey communications and activities that offered the most opportunity for the community of residents and wider local community in the yet-to-be scanned areas to get involved in directing where we went next, and we plan to hold a community event to share the results. While we awaited the final report, which took a little longer than we were expecting, Gavin and I went off and printed Christmas cards as Christmas appeared in the middle and we hadn't had any results by then. We printed Christmas cards for all the residents and included an initial draft of the composite scan that I shared on the previous slide, and hand delivered these in late December so that they knew we were making progress and that they would be the first to know when we had anything to discuss with them. Finally, with the report in our possession, we were able to organise a community conversation event in late March 2025, and this took place in the Tayside Christian Fellowship Garden Room, which is another building on the site of the Charterhouse and one of the organisations who permitted us to undertake scans, and the hall was kindly offered free of charge for the event. Gavin communicated with all of our residents by email, and Richard Oram and I did an open invite letter drop door to door for the rest of the site to widen participation. We also asked all the project stakeholder groups, including CPK, the Perth Society of Natural Sciences, Alder Archaeology, all these other groups that we'd worked with who'd asked to remain informed, to send a representative as well. And we also had support from the Society of Antiquaries on the day, as well as CPK bringing some archival items. At the event, local residents and stakeholders were invited to find out about the results, learn more about the Carthusian monastery, including a selection of the original documents that were displayed in the 2022 exhibition, and explore where the Charterhouse project could go next through a roundtable discussion and via anonymous feedback forms to rate, and prioritise 9 suggested ideas, and there was also a space for offering new and additional suggestions. Over 70 people attended the event in over 3 hours. Approximately 25 of those stayed for the roundtable discussion, and 25 surveys were completed, with 18 completed by those who identified as local residents. From the roundtable surveys and follow-up communications with specific individuals, we've identified the priorities of the resident community and stakeholder groups moving forward. We're currently planning a follow-up meeting to discuss costs of various options, opportunities for funding applications, and follow-up leads of suggested stakeholder contributions, and make a plan going forward in terms of which elements to pursue and who will lead or be involved in each of the activities that as a collective we pursue. For the first time then, I feel like the project is finally finding ways to make its aspirations a reality in terms of how my definition of public history and what it means to me has developed. Concurrent with these developments, I've worked to bring fuller and more meaningful opportunities for the students to reflect on what public history means to them and their project designs into the module. After the 2022-23 run of the module, and leading on the organisation of a REMRA History Talks Live Roundtable in August 2023, with contributors who work on public history as late medieval and early modernists, in which we had various complementary, thought-provoking voices, I worked on changing one of the guest speaker sessions in the module. To this point, our speakers were all public history practitioners and professionals, and I introduced a roundtable session that sought the reflection of academics who work as public historians in varying capacities. The questions on the slide, after much deliberation with the speakers who took part in the first roundtable in 23-24, are those we decided to focus on. Ahead of the class, we asked the students to comment on how they defined public history in week 2 at the start of the module, and to reflect on the discussion board about whether and how their understanding of the term had changed or developed over the few weeks of the module, as well as asking them to try and identify if they knew the differences and similarities between what collaboration, co-production and co-design are. Some of the students' responses and reflections on the pre-class discussion board shared here on the slide and discussed at length with the roundtable participants illustrate the level of critical reflection emerging in the students' engagement with the module and its concepts in a way that was missing in previous runs of the module in terms of the classroom activities and the discussion board activities that were provided. The incorporation of these spaces for reflection in turn fed into the students' work and the critical reflection that they are asked to undertake in their assignments. Moreover, the dialogues that we share in this module space are essential for the students and public history academics alike. Each of the contributors to the roundtable discussion, so the academic contributors that is, in the module, contacted me to express their gratitude for being involved due to the opportunities to reflect openly on these questions that are central to their work, but rarely ones that we pause to think about for as long as we should. In conclusion then, as I hope this talk has illustrated, there is more to research teaching linkages than research-led teaching that showcases our up-to-date research, as important as that is, and that this is just one part of the research teaching nexus. There are equally opportunities provided by the teaching that we do to genuinely influence and provide spaces for developing our thinking and approaches through the dialogues we facilitate with our students. As we look forward to redesigning the public history module, and indeed in the next couple of years, we should be looking at ways to foster this symbiotic relationship within the module and any others that we're developing. I don't think I'm alone in recognising this at the Centre for History or indeed at UHI, but it does seem to be understudied and underappreciated in the pedagogical scholarship, so it's perhaps something we need to be more aware of as a strength or positive practice that we could be shouting about a little bit louder. Finally, while the reflections here are still in a rather embryonic shape, it is essential for more early modern scholars who undertake history work in public to start writing about those experiences. One of the driving forces behind the aforementioned REMRA roundtable emerged from seeking and rarely finding exemplars of early modernists, and to a lesser extent medievalists, writing about their theories, approaches and methods to conducting public history. So many of us do this kind of work, but if we only write about the research results rather than the processes, we have less opportunities to inspire and encourage students and others to look beyond the obvious modern topics that tend to populate public history scholarship and the dialogues about such. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Lucy. That was absolutely fascinating. I really enjoyed that. I know I've got some questions, but can I open the floor first to others on the call? If anybody wants to ask Lucy a question, are we putting questions in the chat or putting hands up, or how are we doing this, Catherine?
Either or. Can I just ask someone? I can't stop the recording before we come to the questions because you're not recording that that bit. Oh, I see the button now. It's okay. So I'm stopping the